On a Tuesday morning in October, at exactly 8,022, I stood in the doorway of my own bedroom and watched my daughter-in-law fold my clothes into a black garbage bag. Not a suitcase, not a box, a garbage bag. She didn't see me at first. She was humming something, moving efficiently through my dresser drawers, lifting out my cardigans, my church blouses, the yellow sweater my husband bought me the Christmas before he died. All of it going into that bag like it was trash, waiting to be put out. I didn't say a word. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I stood there and understood something very clearly for the first time. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how I got here. My name is Carolyn. I'm 67 years old. I've lived in this house on Birchwood Drive in Charlotte, North Carolina since 1981, when my husband Walter and I moved in with a secondhand sofa, a kitchen table that wobbled on one leg, and more hope than sense. We paid $58,000 for it. People laughed at us. The neighborhood was working class, the schools weren't great, and the house needed a new roof within the first 2 years. But Walter said, "Carolyn, this is ours. Nobody can take it from us as long as we take care of it." We took care of it for 39 years together. Then Walter got sick. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctor told us in a beige room with a fake plant in the corner, and I remember thinking that whoever chose that plant had no idea what people needed to look at when they received news like that. Walter died on March 14, 2021. He was 71 years old. He died in our bedroom, in our bed, which is exactly where he wanted to be. I was holding his hand. Our son, Trevor, was in the hallway. He couldn't come in at the end. Some people can't. I didn't hold it against him. For 2 years after, I lived here alone. I learned how to grieve slowly, the way you have to when there isn't anyone left to perform strength for. I learned that grief isn't loud. It's the sound of one coffee cup instead of two. It's reaching for someone in the night and touching only sheets. It's realizing on a Tuesday afternoon that you haven't spoken a word out loud since Sunday morning at church. I adjusted. I volunteered at the Literacy Center on Wednesdays. I kept my garden. I had my neighbor fill a sign over for coffee on Friday mornings, and we'd sit on the back porch and talk about everything and nothing. I was not lonely exactly. I was just a woman living in the shape her life had made. Then Trevor called on a Sunday afternoon in April of 2023. "Mom," he has this way of saying that one word that tells you immediately whether it's good news or bad. This was neither. This was asking, "What is it, baby?" He took a breath. "Sasha and I are going through something. Financially, her business didn't work out the way we planned, and my hours got cut. We're 2 months behind on the apartment." Sasha was his wife. They'd been married 6 years. She'd started a boutique wellness studio. Classes, coaching, crystals, that sort of thing. I'd never understood it exactly, but I hadn't said that out loud. "How bad is it?" I asked. "Bad enough that we might lose the apartment." I looked around my kitchen, the extra bedroom, the finished basement where Walter used to watch football. All that space and just me moving through it. "You can stay here," I said, "while you get back on your feet." There was a pause and then, "Really, Mom? Are you sure?" I was sure, or I thought I was. They arrived on a Saturday in May with 2 carloads of belongings and a U-Haul trailer. I hadn't expected the U-Haul. When I asked about it, Sasha smiled the way she always smiled, perfectly, briefly, and said, "We just want to be comfortable. We don't know how long this will be." I should have asked that same question myself. How long? The first week, things were fine. Trevor made breakfast one morning. Sasha was polite, careful even. But by the second week, I noticed things starting to shift. Small things. My reading chair moved from the corner by the window, where the light was good and where I'd sat to read every evening since 1987, to the other side of the room to open up the space. My collection of ceramic birds, the ones I'd gathered over 30 years from every state Walter and I visited, got consolidated into one box on a shelf. They were just everywhere, Sasha said. It's a lot of visual clutter. Visual clutter. These were my memories. In the third week, Sasha set up her wellness coaching practice in my living room. A ring light, a backdrop, a whole professional setup. She had calls with clients all morning. I started eating my breakfast in the kitchen with the door closed so the sound of my fork on my plate wouldn't disturb her energy. Trevor saw me doing this one morning. He stood in the doorway for a moment, then said, "She's really working hard, Mom. This is her fresh start." What about my peace? I didn't say it. I thought I was being patient. I thought it was temporary. In September, about 4 months in, Sasha sat down with me at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and a very organized expression on her face. "I want to talk about the house," she said. I set down my coffee. "What about it?" "We've been thinking. You have all this space. Trevor and I are trying to rebuild. If we contributed to the mortgage." She stopped when she saw my face. "I know there's no mortgage. That's actually what I wanted to discuss. The property taxes, the maintenance costs. We want to pull our weight. We're thinking we could help manage the finances, set up a shared account. It would make things simpler." Something went cold in me right then. Not anger, more like recognition. "I manage my own finances," I said carefully. "I've been doing it for 40 years. She nodded slowly, the way people do when they think you've missed the point. "Of course, I just want to make sure everything is set up for the future. Estate planning, that kind of thing. It's important to be prepared. My aunt didn't have any of her paperwork in order when she got older, and it was a mess for everyone." I was 67, not 97. I drove myself to church, to the grocery store, to my doctor appointments. I balanced my checkbook every month the way Walter had taught me. But I didn't say any of that. I smiled and changed the subject. That night, I heard them through the wall. My bedroom was now the guest room. I'd given them the master because the ensuite was more practical for 2 people, I'd told myself, because that's how you talk yourself into shrinking. Sasha's voice was low, but not low enough. "We need to start thinking about this more seriously. She's not going to be able to manage this house forever. Trevor, are you even listening to me?" "She's fine, Sasha." "For now, but what about in 5 years, in 10? This house is worth something. We're living here, we're maintaining it. That has to count for something legally." I lay in my single bed in my guest room and stared at the ceiling and listened to the house creak around me the way it always had, settling into the night, familiar as breathing. Legally, that word was still sitting in my chest when I fell asleep. My friend Phyllis Ann called in late October. She'd had a fall, nothing broken, but her daughter was coming up from Savannah to be with her for a few days. "Come have coffee before she gets here," she said. "You look like you need to talk to a human being." "I talk to humans," I said. "You talk to that woman in your house? That's not the same thing." I went. We sat on her porch for 2 hours, and I told her all of it. The chair, the birds, the finances conversation, the wall. When I finished, Phyllis Ann looked at me for a long moment and said, "Carolyn, I say this with love. You are disappearing." I drove home feeling something I hadn't let myself feel in months. Unsettled. Awake. The call from my sister Marlene came on the first Thursday in November. Marlene lived in Richmond and she was 10 years older than me, 77, still sharp, still stubborn the way our mother had been. Her husband Arthur had been in and out of the hospital and this time was serious. fluid around the heart. "I need you," she said. Just those 3 words. Marlene never asked for help, not once in her life. "I'm coming," I said. "I'll leave Friday morning." I told Trevor and Sasha at dinner. Sasha looked up from her plate. "How long will you be gone?" "A week, maybe a little more depending on Arthur's condition." "Of course," she said. "Take as much time as you need. We'll hold things down here." She reached over and put her hand over Trevor's. He nodded but didn't look at me directly. I noticed that, but I didn't know what I was noticing yet. I packed Thursday night. I put my medications in my travel bag, my good coat, the casserole I'd made into a container for Marlene and Arthur, and the card I'd bought that afternoon that said, "I'm here on the front," because sometimes that's all there is to say. Friday morning, I left at 7:15. As I backed out of the driveway, I saw Sasha in the living room window watching me go. She was holding my ceramic cardinal, the one from West Virginia, the first one Walter ever bought me, turning it over in her hands. The drive to Richmond was 4 hours. I spent most of it thinking about Arthur, about Marlene, about the shape of long marriages and what happens when they're threatened. I wasn't thinking about my house. I should have been thinking about my house. I was with Marlene for 8 days. Arthur had surgery on day 2, came through it slowly, cautiously. I cooked and cleaned and answered the phone and sat next to Marlene's chair in the evenings while she slept and the television murmured low. This is what we do. This is what family is supposed to mean. On the 9th day, a Thursday, Marlene told me to go home. "Arthur is stable. My church friends are coming tomorrow. You've done enough." I hugged her for a long time. She's 10 years older than me, and sometimes I feel the distance of that. The fact that she was here first and will leave first, and I don't know how to hold that. I left at 9 in the morning and arrived home at 1:15 in the afternoon. My key didn't work. I stood on the porch for a moment confused, thinking I had the wrong key. Though I'd lived in this house for 42 years and had the same keychain since Walter gave it to me for our anniversary in 2004. A little brass butterfly, worn smooth now. I tried again. The key went in, turned halfway, stopped. Like the lock was frozen, except it was 58 degrees in Charlotte and the lock wasn't frozen. The lock was different. I looked closer. There was a small label on the bottom edge of the new hardware, Fresh Guard Security Solutions. Installation date November 9th. I had left on November 1st. They changed the locks 8 days later. I stood there on my own front porch in my coat with my overnight bag at my feet and understood the way you understand things in the body before the brain catches up. What had been happening while I was in Richmond taking care of my sister. I rang the doorbell, waited, rang again. I could see the light on in the kitchen. I could see movement. I knocked 4 times, solid. The kind of knock that says, "I know you're in there." No one came to the door. I walked around the side of the house, back door locked. The small window in the laundry room that had never quite sealed properly, locked. Every entry point closed. I went back to my car and sat down. My hands were in my lap and they weren't shaking. That surprised me. I thought I'd be shaking. I called Trevor. It went to voicemail after 3 rings. "Trevor, it's your mother. I'm in the driveway. The locks have been changed and I can't get into my house. Call me back." I called again 10 minutes later, voicemail. I called Sasha, straight to voicemail. I sat there for 20 minutes watching the curtain in the front window shift once, then go still. Then I opened my email on my phone. I'm not a person who checks email often. Walter always teased me about it, but I'd set up alerts on my bank account 2 years ago because someone had gotten hold of my debit card number and I'd had to cancel everything, so I had alerts. And in my email, there were 3. The first was from Piedmont Home Equity Partners. Subject line, "Thank you for your inquiry. It was a response to a question about home equity loan eligibility submitted 2 days before I left for Richmond. The account used to submit that inquiry was the joint checking account I'd opened with Trevor 4 years ago for household emergencies. He was the secondary account holder. The second email was from the Mecklenburg County Register of Deeds, a confirmation that someone had accessed the public records portal and pulled the deed history for 1147 Birchwood Drive. My address. Pulled on November 4th, 3 days after I left. The third was a newsletter from a senior living community in Huntersville called The Pines at Mallard Creek. It was addressed to Trevor Ellison. It had been forwarded to my account by mistake or because Trevor had added my email to his profile at some point and forgotten to remove it. The subject line was, "Information Packet, Independent and Assisted Living Options for Your Loved One." My loved one. I was the loved one. I read all 3 emails twice. Then I sat very still and thought about Sasha's voice through the wall. This house is worth something. That has to count for something legally. I thought about the yellow legal pad. I thought about the look Trevor gave me at dinner the night I said I was going to Richmond. Not quite meeting my eyes. I didn't leave. I want to be clear about that. Every part of me that was tired and cold and hurt wanted to drive to Phyllis Ann's house and sit on her porch and cry. But this was my house, the house Walter and I had paid for together every month for 22 years until it was ours free and clear. The house where Trevor learned to walk, falling onto the living room carpet over and over again, laughing every time he went down like it was the funniest thing in the world. I drove 2 streets over and parked in front of the park where I'd pushed Trevor in a stroller 40 years ago. From there, if I looked at an angle, I could just see the roofline of my house. At 3 o'clock, Sasha came out the front door in her exercise clothes and stood on my porch with a mug in her hands, looking out at the street like it was a view she owned. She turned slightly, tilted her face up to the afternoon sun. She looked comfortable. Settled. I knew that look. It was the look of someone who believed they had already won. I ate the crackers I had in my purse and drank water from the bottle in my cup holder. At dusk, I drove to the Walgreens on Morrison Boulevard and used their restroom and bought a bottle of water and a bag of trail mix. The young woman at the register, teenager, pink headband, kind face, said, "You okay, ma'am? You look cold." "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a long day." "You want me to call someone?" The question landed somewhere soft in me. "No, thank you. You're very sweet to ask." I sat in the Walgreens parking lot for a while after that, watching people come and go with their ordinary purchases for their ordinary evenings. I thought about Walter. I thought about what he would say. He wasn't a dramatic man. He was quiet and practical. And he believed that most problems could be solved if you simply refused to be defeated by them. He used to say, "Carolyn, don't ever let anybody make you feel like a guest in your own life." He said it first when I was passed over for a promotion at work in 1994, and I'd talked myself into being grateful that I still had a job at all. He said it again when I almost didn't speak up at a neighborhood association meeting because I thought the men in the room knew better. He meant it every time. I wasn't going to be a guest in my own house either. At 5:30 in the morning, I drove to a 24-hour Denny's on Independence Boulevard and ordered coffee and eggs and sat in a booth by the window until daylight came. The waitress, a woman maybe 10 years older than me, silver-haired and efficient, refilled my coffee without asking. She saw my overnight bag in the seat beside me and didn't say anything for a while. Then, on her third pass, she set down the check and said quietly, "Whatever it is, you look like somebody who knows what to do." "I think I do," I said. Good. That was enough. At 7:15, I called my neighbor, Bernard Whitaker. He'd lived 3 houses down for 20 years. He was a retired electrician, 72, and he and Walter had built the deck in my backyard together over a long, hot weekend in 2009. When Walter died, Bernard had come over and sat in the kitchen for an hour and didn't say much, which was exactly right. "Bernard, it's Carolyn." "Carolyn, it's early." "I know, I need a favor." I told him enough, not all of it, but enough. Bernard went quiet for a moment and then said, "You're telling me you're locked out of your own house?" "Yes." "And the locks were changed while you were in Richmond?" "Yes." "By your son?" "By someone in my house." Another pause. Then, "My nephew Damon does locksmith work." "Does it right? You want his number?" "I want him to meet me at my house in an hour if he can." "I'll call him now. Carolyn, you okay?" "I will be." Damon arrived at 8:40 in a gray pickup truck, a big quiet man in his late 30s with careful hands. Bernard came too and stood at the end of the driveway with his arms folded, not saying anything, just being present. That was enough. Damon examined the new lock, then looked at me. "You're the owner?" 42 years. He nodded. "Give me 30 minutes. It took 25. He installed a new deadbolt, Kwikset 9/8, he told me, the same grade used in commercial buildings, and handed me 3 keys, bright brass. New. "I can reinforce the back door frame too if you want. Older homes, the strike plate's usually the weak point." "Please." He did that too. When he finished, Bernard pulled out his wallet and Damon shook his head. "Aunt, come on." "What do I owe you?" I asked. "Nothing, ma'am. My grandmother went through something similar. It's not the first time I've done this kind of thing." He picked up his toolbox. "You call me if you need anything else. Day or night." He drove away. Bernard looked at me. "You need me to stay?" "No, but thank you." He nodded and walked back toward his house, slow and deliberate. I watched him go. Then I put the key in my lock. One smooth turn. The deadbolt slid back with a sound like something finally exhaled. I opened my door and walked into my house. The smell was the first thing, different. A candle scent, something herbal and expensive, layered over the smell that had been mine for 42 years. My house used to smell like coffee and the lavender sachets I kept in the linen closet and, faintly, always, like the cedar chest at the foot of my bed that had been my mother's before it was mine. My things were still here, some of them. My wedding portrait was off the mantel. It was on the floor in the hallway, leaning against the wall, still in its frame, but moved, set aside as if it was in the way. I picked it up and put it back where it belonged. I walked through each room. The living room had been rearranged for Sasha's filming setup. The dining room was being used as a storage space for their boxes. My sewing room, the small room off the hallway that I'd used for 30 years, had been cleared out and Sasha's yoga equipment was in there. A mat, blocks, a bolster, a small tabletop altar with candles and smooth stones. My sewing machine was in a box in the corner. I went into my guest room, my room for the past 6 months, and found it mostly as I'd left it. But on the small dresser, there was a notepad in Sasha's handwriting. Not addressed to me. A list. Mom C. Options. And underneath, the Pines. Call Monday. Heritage Oaks. Trevor has info. In-home care assessment. Need referral from doctor. Mom C. That was me. I was an item on a list. I folded the notepad and put it in my cardigan pocket. Then I started. I went to their bedroom, my bedroom, and I did not throw anything. I did not break anything. I folded their clothes the way I fold everything, neatly, with attention. I packed his into the duffel bags he'd brought and hers into the wheeled suitcases with the gold hardware. I collected her candles, her supplements lined up on my dresser, her charging cables, her skincare bottles arranged by height on my bathroom counter. I packed the yoga equipment in a bag. I took down the backdrop and the ring light and the wireless router they'd installed and packed those too. I worked for an hour and 40 minutes. Then I carried everything to the front lawn, not thrown, set down, organized. His bag's on the left, hers on the right, the equipment in the middle, neat. Mrs. Fujikawa from across the street was getting her mail. She stopped, looked at the lawn, looked at me. I waved. She waved back and then slowly started clapping. I went inside and made myself coffee. Real coffee, the dark roast I'd been buying from the same shop on Park Road since 1998. I sat at my kitchen table, in my kitchen, with my coffee, and I waited. At 10:23, I heard the sound of a key not working, then knocking. Then Sasha's voice, controlled at first, then rising. What happened to the door? Trevor, something's wrong with the lock. More knocking. Carolyn, her voice changed when she understood. Carolyn, open this door. I stood up, walked to the front door, and opened it. Sasha was in her workout clothes, hair pulled back. Trevor was behind her, still in his jacket, like he'd just gotten back from somewhere. He looked at the bags on the lawn and something moved across his face. Not quite surprise. More like something he'd been dreading had arrived. What did you do? Sasha said. I changed the locks on my house, I said, the same way you did. That is not. She stopped. Started again. We did that for security. There was a suspicious car in the neighborhood. Sasha. My voice was very calm. I'd surprised myself at how calm I was. You sent my son to request information on home equity loans using our joint account. You pulled my deed from the county registry. You already have a list of senior living facilities with notes about an in-home care assessment. She went still. I have the emails, I said. I have the timestamps. I know what this was. Trevor said, Mom. I looked at my son who had learned to walk in this living room, who had called me every Sunday for the first 10 years of his marriage until someone started filling that time with other things, who had held my hand at his father's funeral and whose grief I had stood next to and held without once making it about myself. Did you tell her to do this? I asked him directly, or did you go along with it because it was easier than saying no? He didn't answer. That was an answer. I'm not asking you to be perfect, I said. I'm asking you to be honest. You knew what she was planning. His eyes were wet. I thought it was just talking, thinking ahead. I didn't think it would get to. Trevor. I let his name sit there for a second. She packed my mother's Bible into a box labeled donation. Did you know about that? His mouth opened. She told me those were old things that. It was your grandmother's Bible. It has her handwriting in the margins. He pressed his hand over his face. You have 20 minutes to load what you need from the yard, I said. After that, you're trespassing and I'll call the police. Sasha turned to Trevor. Are you going to let her do this? We live here. We don't have anywhere to go. I didn't have anywhere to go 8 days ago when you changed these locks, I said. I slept in my car. She opened her mouth and closed it. Trevor started carrying bags to the Lexus. He moved like a man in slow motion. Sasha stood very still for a moment. Then she began helping, slamming the trunk harder than necessary, not looking at me. At one point, Trevor stopped. He was holding his father's old toolbox, the red Craftsman one I kept in the garage, the one he'd used as a little boy, handing Walter tools on Saturday mornings like he was assisting at something important. I didn't remember packing it into his bag. Maybe he'd had it already. He looked at me. Where are we supposed to go? I don't know, I said. Where was I supposed to go when you locked me out of my own house? He had no answer for that. At 11,005, they pulled out of the driveway. Sasha in the passenger seat, looking straight ahead. Trevor drove. He slowed at the end of the driveway and looked in the rearview mirror once, just briefly, before they turned the corner and were gone. I went inside, closed the door, locked it. I walked through every room again, touching the walls, the door frames, the window sills. In the living room, I put my ceramic birds back in their places, unpacking them from the box one by one. Cardinal from West Virginia. Blue jay from Maine. The painted quail from New Mexico that Walter found at a roadside stand and thought I might like. I set each one in its spot, and the room started remembering itself. Then I went to the kitchen and called Phyllis Ann. "You're home," she said when she heard my voice. "I am." A pause. Then she knew. She always knew. "Tell me." I told her. When I finished, there was a silence on the line, and then Phyllis Ann said, "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't eat. I'm bringing food." She came with a container of soup and a pan of cornbread, and she sat across from me at the kitchen table, and we talked for 2 hours. We talked about the soup and about Marlene and Arthur and about Bernard's nephew Damon and his careful hands and about my wedding portrait that was back on the mantel where it belonged and about Walter's voice saying, "Don't let anyone make you feel like a guest in your own life." "You know he's going to call," Phyllis Ann said. "I know." "What are you going to do when he does?" I thought about that for a while. "I'm going to let him." She raised an eyebrow. "I'm going to let him call," I said, "and I'm going to listen, and then I'm going to decide what I do next on my own terms and in my own time." "That's fair," she said. "It's the only fair thing left." The first call came 4 days later, a Saturday morning, my phone buzzing while I was in the garden. I let it ring. The voicemail said, "Mom, I know you don't want to hear from me. I understand. I need you to know I'm sorry, really sorry. Not just for what happened with the house, for all of it. For not being who you needed me to be for the past year. I don't know if that means anything right now, but I needed to say it." I sat on my garden bench and listened to it twice. Then I went back to planting my bulbs. The second call came on Thanksgiving. He left another message? I keep thinking about Dad's turkey. I know that's a stupid thing to say, but I keep thinking about how the whole house smelled on Thanksgiving morning and how you always let me eat one piece of the cornbread before dinner, no matter how many times Dad said to wait. I miss the house. I miss you. I miss knowing I was your son in the way that actually meant something. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I saved that one. I didn't know why. I just did. The Monday after Thanksgiving, I called an estate attorney. Her name was Louise. No, actually, I want to say her name correctly because she matters to this story. Her name was Andrea Moss. She had an office on South Tryon Street, and she'd been recommended by Phyllis Ann's sister-in-law, who'd used her for exactly this kind of situation. Andrea was in her 50s, a black woman with natural hair and reading glasses she wore on a chain around her neck, and the kind of patient, careful attention that good lawyers and good teachers share. I sat in her office and told her everything. She listened without interrupting, writing notes, her pen moving steadily across the pad. When I finished, she said, "Mrs. Ellison, you did everything right. The fact that you documented the emails, acted quickly, and secured the property puts you in a very strong position." Then she walked me through the plan. The deed would be formally retitled to remove Trevor's name from any emergency access instruments I'd carelessly granted him. My power of attorney would be updated. I chose Phyllis Ann as my primary agent, my pastor's wife as secondary. My will would be revised with conditions similar to what Andrea called a character clause. Trevor could inherit only if we had rebuilt a genuine relationship over time. If not, the house would pass to a scholarship fund for first-generation college students at the HBCU 40 minutes from Charlotte, where Walter had gotten his degree. "I'm not punishing him," I said. "I'm protecting myself and giving him a reason to be better." That's exactly right, Andrea said. We also scheduled a cognitive assessment with my physician, not because there was any question of my mental state, but because Andrea said, very practically, if anyone ever tries to claim you weren't competent when you made these decisions, we will have medical evidence from this exact date that you were completely sharp. Insurance against bad faith claims. I had the assessment done that Friday. My doctor, who had known me for 15 years, found it a little absurd but understood. She signed the paperwork confirming that I was oriented, coherent, and fully capable of managing my own affairs. The assessment results, the updated will, the deed documentation, all of it was filed and in order before the end of November. December came. I went back to my church, New Covenant Baptist, where I'd been a member since 1984. I had been going less and less while they were in the house. I told myself I was busy, tired, but the truth is I was ashamed of how small I'd become, how I'd let myself be slowly boxed out of my own life like furniture that doesn't fit the aesthetic. Walking back in felt like surfacing. Sister Henrietta grabbed my hands in the vestibule and said, "Carolyn Ellison, where on earth have you been?" And I said, "Home. I'm back now." She looked at me in that way churchwomen look at you when they understand more than you said, and she nodded once and let it rest. I went back to the literacy center. I had a student, a boy named, I'll call him Deshaun. He was 12, reading at a third-grade level when we started, furious about it in the way kids are furious when they know they're smart and can't quite make the tools work. By December, we were at a 5th-grade level, and he was reading a book about the Wright brothers because he decided he might want to be an engineer. This mattered to me more than I can say. Phillison started coming for coffee on Fridays again. Bernard shoveled my walk the first time it snowed without being asked. The woman who ran the flower shop near the grocery store asked where I'd been, and when I said I'd had some family difficulty, she said, "Well, it's good to see you back." And I thought, yes, it is. A letter arrived in the mail in the second week of December, handwritten, Trevor's handwriting on the envelope, my name. I made tea before I opened it. Sat at the table with the afternoon light coming through the kitchen window the way it always does in December, low and golden. Then I read it. Dear Mom, I've been talking to someone, a therapist, Dr. Okafor. I started seeing him 3 weeks ago, and he's the first person who's asked me the question I didn't want to answer. At what point did you stop seeing your mother as a person and start seeing her as a problem to be managed? I've been sitting with that for 3 weeks. I still don't have a good answer. I know I told myself I was looking out for you. That's what Sasha kept saying, that we were being practical, being responsible, planning ahead. But planning ahead for what? For getting you out of your own house? That's not responsibility, that's something else. Sasha and I are separated. She moved back to Atlanta last week. I'm in a 2-bedroom in Belmont, paying rent like a grown man should. I have Dad's toolbox. I've been fixing things around the apartment with it. Little things, a stuck drawer, a loose hinge. It makes me feel better in a way I can't explain. Like I'm trying to be the kind of man who builds instead of takes. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I'm not asking for that. I'm asking if someday, not now, whenever you're ready, maybe never, I can earn back the right to be your son the way you raised me to be. I love you. I'm sorry, doesn't cover it. Trevor? I sat for a long time after I read that. My tea got cold. The light shifted and went gray. Then I called Phyllisine. I read her the letter. When I finished, she was quiet, and then she said, "What do you want to do?" "I think I want to wait," I said. "See if this is real." "How will you know?" "He'll show up," I said, not calling, not writing. He'll actually show up. He did. 3 weeks after the letter, on a Saturday morning in January, he texted, "Mom, I know I don't have the right to ask, but I noticed when I drove past that the gutter on the east side of the house is sagging. Dad always said if you let the gutters go, the fascia rots. Can I come fix it? I'll bring my own ladder. I won't ask to come in." I stared at that text for a long time. I wrote back Saturday at 9, "Bring your tools." He arrived at 8:57, 3 minutes early. He was thinner. He was wearing an old work jacket I recognized from years ago. Something practical, not trying to impress anyone. He got out of a car I didn't know, a used Honda Civic, basic, and he was carrying a ladder on his shoulder and his father's toolbox in his other hand. He stopped at the edge of the driveway. "Morning, Mom." "Morning, East Side." He nodded and went to work. I went out to the garden and worked on the beds, turning the winter soil, making room for what comes in spring. For 2 hours, we worked without talking, him on his ladder, me in my garden, both of us doing what needed to be done. Finally, he came down and set the ladder against the house. "Gutters fixed. Reattached the bracket and cleared the downspout. Should be fine." "Thank you." A pause. He looked at the garden. "You're putting bulbs in?" "For spring." "Daffodils?" "And some tulips. Your father always liked the yellow ones." He nodded. Something passed across his face that I recognized from when he was a boy and trying not to cry in front of other people. "Mom," he said, "I'm not going to keep showing up unless you want me to, but I'd like to if that's something you can consider." I kept my hands in the soil. "How's therapy going?" "Hard. Useful." "Are you learning anything?" "I'm learning that I spent the last 2 years letting someone else do my thinking for me, and that I knew what was happening and I told myself it was love and it wasn't." I sat back on my heels and looked at him, my son. The same eyes as his father. The same way of standing when he's being honest, square on his feet, not shifting. "Your father used to say," I said slowly, "that you don't get to coast on who you were yesterday. You have to earn your place every single day." I remember. He meant it for himself too. He wasn't preaching. He was reminding himself out loud. Trevor's jaw tightened. I want to be who he thought I was. "Then be that. Show up. Don't coast, that's all." He picked up the ladder, started toward his car, then he stopped. "Is it okay if I come back next weekend? The front step has a loose board. I noticed it when I walked up." I looked at the front step. He was right. I've been meaning to deal with that since fall. 9 o'clock, I said. He came back the next Saturday, and the one after that. He fixed the step, replaced a section of rotted deck board, recaulked the bathroom window that had been letting cold air in for 2 winters. He never asked to come inside. I started leaving coffee on the porch railing for him, and one Saturday he said thank you, and I said you're welcome, and that was it. In March, on the first warm Sunday of spring, Phyllis came for dinner. Bernard and his wife Coretta came too. My friend Lydia from choir, who I'd been avoiding for a year out of that same shame, came with a lemon cake she'd made from scratch. I set the table, my table, in my house, with my dishes, the good ones I'd gotten as a wedding present in 1979 and never stopped using because what exactly was I saving them for? At one point, I looked out the window and saw Trevor's car at the curb. He was in it, not coming in, just there. Like he wasn't sure if he was allowed. I went to the door and opened it. He saw me and waited. "Come in," I said. "There's food." He came up the walk, slow. He stood in the doorway and looked at the room. Phyllis, Bernard, Coretta, Lydia, the table full of food, the ceramic birds on the shelf, the wedding portrait on the mantel. "Hey, Trevor," Phyllisine said, easy as anything. "Go wash your hands. Soup's getting cold." He laughed, the kind of laugh that comes from relief. He went and washed his hands and sat at the table, and it wasn't easy, wasn't uncomplicated, but it was real. After dinner, he helped me with the dishes. We stood at the sink the way we used to when he was young, him washing, me drying, neither of us saying much because we didn't need to. "Thank you for letting me come in," he said quietly. "Thank you for earning it," I said. He left before dark. I stood at the front window and watched his taillights disappear around the corner, the way you watch lights disappear and know that the darkness after them isn't empty. It's just the night, which ends, the way nights do. I locked the door. One clean turn of the key, my lock, my house. In my living room, my birds were in their places. In my hallway, my portrait was back where it belonged. In my garden, beneath the soil I'd worked all winter, the bulbs were waiting for spring. People ask me sometimes if I wish I'd acted sooner, set harder limits earlier. I think about that. I think about all the small moments when I folded myself smaller and called it patience, when I moved out of rooms and called it accommodation, when I swallowed words and called it keeping the peace. What I know now is this: peace that you purchase by disappearing from your own life isn't peace. It's surrender with a polite name. I am not interested in polite surrender anymore. I know what my house smells like in the morning. I know which floorboards creak and where the light comes through in December, and exactly how long it takes the radiator to warm the back bedroom on a cold night. I know these things because this is my home, mine, not because I'm rigid or unkind or unwilling to share, but because I am here and I am not going anywhere, and the door I open or close is mine to decide. The key is on my nightstand when I sleep, solid brass, new. I put it there on purpose. Some things you need to be able to reach in the dark. I've thought a lot about what made all of this possible. Not the lock change, not the lawn, not the lawyer. All of that came later. What made it possible was something quieter, something that had been building in me for a long time without my knowing it. When Sasha was packing my things into a garbage bag, my cardigans, my church blouses, Walter's last Christmas gift to me, she wasn't doing something new. She was finishing something I had already started myself. Every time I folded myself smaller to keep the peace, every time I ate breakfast with the door closed so my fork wouldn't disturb her calls, every time I swallowed a word and called it patience, I was packing myself away just as surely as she did. What she did with that garbage bag was only the final visible version of what I'd been allowing quietly for months. That's what I mean when I say consequences don't fall out of nowhere. They grow from the small choices we make or don't make long before anything dramatic happens. I made small choices to disappear. She made small choices to advance. By the time I was standing on my own porch with a key that didn't work, we'd both just arrived at where those choices were always leading. What changed things wasn't anger. I want to be clear about that because I think people expect a story like this to be about rage, about getting even, about finally snapping. But that's not what I felt sitting in my car 2 blocks from my own house at midnight, eating crackers from my purse. What I felt was clarity. A cold, quiet understanding that no one was coming to fix this for me. That if I wanted my life back, my actual life, my birds on the shelf, my coffee the way I liked it, my mornings in the garden, I was the only one who could go get it. That kind of clarity is something you have to earn. Not through suffering exactly, but through honesty. The honesty to look at what you've been doing and name it. I'd been calling my surrender patience. I'd been calling my fear of conflict kindness. It wasn't kindness. It was avoidance. And avoidance is just fear with better manners. What I also had to find, and this was harder, was the discipline to act carefully instead of reactively. I didn't break a window. I didn't scream in the street. I waited through a very long night, thought through every step, called the right person, documented the evidence, and then acted. That discipline, the willingness to think clearly when you have every reason to fall apart, is what separated a moment of crisis from a turning point. Anyone can explode. It takes something steadier to rebuild. And then there's Trevor, my son. I didn't write him off, but I didn't take him back easily either. I made him show up, made him fix things with his hands, made him sit with what he'd done long enough for it to actually change him. Because love without standards isn't love. It's just need-wearing love's clothes. Real love holds people accountable. Real love says, I believe you can be better, and I'm going to require that you prove it. That's what I want anyone to take from this. Not that you should harden yourself, not that you should stop trusting people, but that the character you build, the honesty you practice, the discipline you develop, the courage to act when everything in you wants to stay small, that character is the only thing nobody can lock you out of. Walter used to say, don't let anyone make you feel like a guest in your own life. I finally understood what he meant.